Okay.
Perhaps we should have anticipated that members of the Lebanese military whom we were trying to assist would simply lay down their arms and refuse to fight their own countrymen. In any case, the sending of the Marines to Beirut was a source of my greatest regret and my greatest sorrow as president. Every day since the death of those boys, I've prayed for them and their loved ones. The question that I think that raises is, can the U.S. impose its values on a part of the world where democratic institutions simply are not there? And if we're trying to impose democracy in the Middle East, we run the risk of empowering forces like the Muslim Brotherhood, which is rising up in influence in Egypt. So what I propose in my book, Bringing America Home, is a strategy which says you only send American troops abroad when our national interest is involved. The mission is clearly defined, and we have an appropriate exit strategy. And it has the support of the American people. Okay. I would limit our, as much as possible, begin to extricate our soldiers from Iraq and Afghanistan. I would, for example, in Afghanistan, we're spending $100 billion a year of money we don't have. I would begin to extricate the troops working with surrogates or potential allies at $1 billion a year. I think it would be more effective than the American soldiers over there at the cost that we're having to pay, and also the loss of lives. I mean, what is the purpose in Afghanistan today? Is it to prop up the Karzai regime? And I would refocus a strategy with a greater emphasis on a strong intelligence arm. The CIA was very effective under Bill Casey in the Reagan administration in dealing with the Soviet threat. A very strong intelligence arm, working with allies, providing assistance. I mean, you see in African nations, for example, what's happening to Christians in predominantly Muslim areas, providing indirect, quiet assistance to our allies, our Christian friends in the parts of the world where there's a real battle as to who's going to prevail. I would put greater emphasis on the importance of the economic warfare side of it, because what happens if all of a sudden the Middle East falls under the control of radical Islamic forces with our dependence on their foreign energy? So I would have an energy strategy which is designed to make us as less dependent as possible, as least dependent as possible on unstable forces of foreign energy.
Well, I think one story that's not really getting a lot of play is that the former Revolutionary Guard commander in Iran is now the head of OPEC.
Yeah, I mean, this is very the kind of power over our economy that can be exercised. I don't care whether it's the radicals in the Middle East or a would-be Fidel Castro in Venezuela, Hugo Chavez, who's in control of their energy there, or you take a look at other situations like China, where they're the lender and we're the borrower. All of these things, what kind of influence do we have in foreign policy over China if we don't like something they're doing? We're going to send a diplomat over and say, you better stop doing that? And they may just say, well, I guess we'll have to stop buying your dollars and start selling them on the market. Now, maybe it's not in their economic interest, but they're in a much better economic position than we are today. So you have to have a broad-based strategy to sort of wean ourselves out of the ditch that we've gotten in over the past decade under Republican and Democratic administrations.
Yeah. Well, last Thursday there was an interesting interchange during the presidential debate on the topic of Iran and whether or not Iran's a threat. One presidential candidate from your home state says Iran isn't a threat because they don't have a navy, or they don't have an air force that could bomb us, and they don't make their own gas. One says, well, they absolutely, Santorum says they absolutely are a threat, and radical Islam and the state-sponsored terror. How does the U.S. if we took a new strategy to deal with radical Islam and have our interactions with the Middle East, how will we address a country like Iran and their nuclear program?
I think, in a way, we've made a bad situation worse over there because when the Bush administration went into Iraq in a preemptive war to get rid of a bloody secular dictator, a number of us who are conservatives, and also some former generals like General Zinni, who was very knowledgeable about the Middle East, General Schwarzkopf, who was involved in Iraq One. They warned against that. And I warned at the time of what I call the law of unintended consequences. You get rid of a bloody secular dictator like Saddam Hussein, what's going to happen to the Christians? And we've seen the Christians having
They're
been
fleeing.
run off, they're fleeing from Iraq. And secondly, you empower Shiite fundamentalist leaders like Sadr, who is now one of the most influential figures in Iraq, Shiite fundamentalist figures with close ties to the mullahs in Iran. So you made a bad situation worse. So I would disagree with Rick Santorum based upon his strong support for going into Iraq in the first place. I think that was a strategic mistake. Now, what do you do now? You've got a serious problem with regard to Iran. There's a lot of unrest in Iran. My hope would be that quietly and indirectly, that there are forces there you could work with that are tired of being under this sort of radical fundamentalist Shiite regime since the overthrow of the Shah, which I think was one of the terrible things that happened in the Jimmy Carter administration. In fact, it was in my first days in the Reagan administration on the White House lawn when the President Reagan welcomed the hostages back from Iran in 1981. And it was like the cloud was lifted and America was back. And that is, I think if we have a smart policy, we can get the attention of these folks. I mean, Gaddafi messed with us for a while. We strafed Gaddafi. He went away for a long period of time.
Yeah.
But I don't think the approach of endless wars and keep sending our forces overseas, which we, A, financially can't afford, and B, you cannot keep sending young men and women over for multiple tours without having an impact on them. I was in Vietnam, and I know how important it is not to overwork your soldiers. We're overworking our soldiers, and particularly our National Guard, who are not suited for these endless wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. They're better suited to control our borders or to deal with emergency situations like floods.
Great. As a follower of Christ, I was definitely interested in trying to. Your statement during your speech here this morning that if we don't fix the culture, everything will be for naught.
Sure.
What do you think needs to be done?
Well, look, I give you a little example as I did in my book, Bringing America Home. I worked with Nancy Reagan on the Just Say No to Drugs program. And one of the things we saw at the time was the Hollywood culture pushing these pro-druggy movies out there and encouraging young people to get into the drug culture. It's a cool thing to do. Well, anybody who's dealt with people who are in the drug culture know how once they get into it, how hard it is to undo it and the damage that can be done. Well, Mrs. Reagan used the bully pulpit to get the Hollywood folks to stop making those kind of movies, which they did for a period of time. Now they're back to making it. But I think you've got to, whether it's the president, whether it's the first lady, whether it's a team of people, you've got to be willing to stand up and say, look, the leading export in America is our Hollywood values, and it isn't too great if you're overseas and seeing the effects it has on other people and seeing the effects it has on our young people. So the time has come to say, you know, you've got to clean up your act, and also we have to understand we've got to get back to our traditional moral principles in this country. And it has social and economic consequences. A strong family is good for the culture, good for society, and also good for the American economy. A broken family, dysfunctional family, people that simply live for the moment, that's not what this country was all about.
Okay. You're the chair, still chair of Texas Workforce Commission? Okay. Texas Governor Rick Perry is now in the presidential race, and he's touting himself as the jobs candidate. Is what's going on in Texas, is that the type of job growth that you would like to see nationwide, or I've heard comments that there's a lot of lower paying jobs that have been created?
Well, I think that Governor Perry has done a good job in creating and pushing job creation and economic development in Texas. We have in Texas a system that's been in place for an extended period of time. We have no state income tax. We have a modest business tax. We have a positive regulatory climate, and the governor has utilized that to encourage economic development, and we've done a great job of poaching jobs, if you will, from the high tax, high regulatory states like California, Michigan, and Illinois. The problem, whether for Texas or anyone else that's done a good job on that front, is ultimately it's a zero-sum game if nationally other nations are poaching more jobs from us. So we're fighting over a shrinking economic pie. That's why I favor replacing our corporate tax structure with a revenue-neutral business consumption tax that would be border adjusted, that would level the playing field with our trading competitors.
Has there been anybody on the other side of the aisle that's expressed interest in your approach?
Actually, Senator Fritz Hollings, a former Democratic senator from South Carolina, has endorsed this concept. Pat Choate, who ran for vice president with Ross Perot as an independent candidate, is a strong supporter of this idea. In fact, I've had him in Texas at a conference called Putting America Back to Work, in which he endorsed this idea. So I think it's an idea that can bring Americans together, Republicans and Democrats, business and labor together, because anybody looking at what's happening, we're replacing good-paying manufacturing jobs with low-pay service jobs. So if we keep doing what we're doing, you're going to have the rich and the poor, or the rich and the rest of the American people, and that's got to change. We have a strong middle class as the backbone of this society, and it's what's made it work historically. And you've got to have an economic system that rewards investing in America, rather than sending the jobs to China, Germany, Mexico, or elsewhere.
All right. Well, thank you. My